Hi, everyone. Welcome to the fifth webcast of the 2017 Pediatric Summit webcast. We are so excited to have you guys listening. And if you haven't purchased your tickets for the Pediatric Summit yet, you can do so by going to www.pediatricsummit.com. The webcasts have been a preview of all of the speakers that will be at our seminar, and we are so excited to see you all there. Today, I have the honor of introducing Dr. Robert Melillo. Dr. Melillo is the co-founder of the Brain Balance program, and he has written many books, The Disconnected Kids and Reconnected Kids, and he has spent over 25 years studying the neurodevelopmental conditions in kids and adults as well. And we are so excited to have you today. Hi, Dr. Robert. How are you?
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, awesome. Well, if you wouldn't mind just taking some time and talking about the conditions that you see in kids today and how it's affecting our society.
Sure. You know, I think I often say that the most important social issue of our time is actually what's happening to our children and has been happening to our children. And now we're actually seeing it really in young adulthood. And that is these neurodevelopmental issues. The numbers are staggering. 30 years ago, autism was 1 in 10,000 kids. It's now 1 in 67 or 1 in 50 boys here. And it's a worldwide issue. ADHD affects 1 in 9 kids, or roughly 11%. Dyslexia, learning disabilities, affects 15 to 20% of the entire population. Right now, we're looking at conservatively 1 in 5 kids and adolescents in the United States have some sort of mental disorder or label behavioral or learning challenge. It is really staggering. I mean, we're really facing an epidemic that we've never really seen before. Give you an idea, polio was considered an epidemic when it was 1 in 2,700 children. We're looking at 1 in 5. And so, when you look at that and you look at the factors that are leading to it, my third book, it was really what causes neurodevelopmental issues. And when you see something increasing that rapidly, the only way it can really happen is really primarily being driven by environmental factors. So identifying those environmental factors are important because not only does that mean that we can actually treat these issues and change them after the fact, but it also means that we can actually prevent them from actually understanding what the environmental factors are, and then, lowering an individual or couple's risk of those environmental factors and reducing their impact. But, I think it is hugely important. And essentially this epidemic of obesity, diabetes, and cancer, and these lifestyle-driven issues that are affecting adults are affecting children. But in children, what's happening is their brains are developing more rapidly. And so we see these developmental issues in kids that are really a reflection of the chronic illnesses that we're seeing in society as a whole.
Mm-hmm. So in your 25 years of experience, why is it important to have early detection, or why do we need to catch this early with kids?
Well, again, what I want people to realize is that what I teach and what I do and what I develop and what I write about is really developmental neurology. It's not just pediatrics, because understand that your brain, my brain, actually was built in going back into the time we were in the womb, and it was built through most of our early adult life. Your brain is still developing. So you could still actually have developmental issues that may show up now. And we know that even things like schizophrenia, it may not show up until someone's in their 20s, but we know it starts in the womb. And we know that if you take, two identical twins, one of whom ends up being schizophrenic in their 20s and the other, who does not, and we look back at 6 months of age, we can already see there's a difference in the way they move. There's a difference in their motor milestones. there's a difference in how they crawl or when they walk. And we see that the one that's going to develop schizophrenic is already showing signs of a delay. Now, what is causing those delays? What is affecting the movement? We can intervene then, and we may be able to change it, and that person may never get schizophrenia when they're 25. You understand? So, but all of those issues, and I've never seen someone who ended up with a later diagnosis, whether it was, in their teens or in their 20s, that didn't struggle earlier on in their life. But what happens, because these are developmental imbalances, these individuals usually have really exceptional skills in certain networks in their brain. So they're able to compensate, and they make it through because they're really good at certain things, even though they're struggling at other things. And it isn't until they get to a certain point in life when they can't compensate any longer, or that imbalance gets even worse because they tend to do that over time. And so therefore, we might be able to really affect someone from struggling and suffering their whole life if we intervene early on. And most of these issues that are developmental, that show up either when they're 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 or 25 or 30, we can identify usually within the first year if we know how to look for them.
So is that what you're doing at the Brain Balance Center? Are you looking for those environmental factors, or what exactly happens there?
Environmental factors are really more from a preventative standpoint, right? So looking at that, what we're looking at is after the fact, identifying the nature of the imbalance, the nature of the issue, right? All of these things, no matter what anybody says, they are these developmental imbalances between networks. A guy named Lou Cozolino, we refer to this in our lab as a functional disconnection problem. Lou Cozolino, who's one of the leading psychologists in the United States, he had a great definition in one of his books called The Neuroscience of Psychotherapy, where he basically said that when anybody comes in for any symptoms, whether it's, mental health, psychology, or, really anything, that the problem always comes down to there is a problem with development, integration, and regulation of networks that are very important for human functioning. That ultimately, that's what it comes down to. When somebody comes to you with a problem, and there are neurological symptoms at all, you have to look at it and say, unless it's a peripheral neuropathy and an isolated issue, or a spinal cord injury or brain injury, when people come to you with anything, whether it's vertigo, dizziness, when they come to you with headaches, and if they have problems with attention or with learning or emotional regulation, ultimately there is a delay in development, or many times it can go back to development, or it actually is this kind of imbalance or lack of integration between networks. So ultimately, what we're looking to do is identify that, because the makeup of that imbalance is different in every individual person. So that, not only are we looking at delays on the right side where there may be advanced networks on the left side of the brain, but also the makeup of that. What areas on that right side of the brain are delayed? Is it their academic skills? What academic skills? Is it their motor skills? What specific motor skills? Is it sensory processing or sensory detection? Is it the way it's regulating their immune system or their autonomic system? And it's different, and there are hundreds of different, areas of the brain, and there are thousands of different subnetworks in the brain that can be disrupted or dysrhythmic with one another. And then a lot of the symptoms actually come from the areas of the brain that are actually too strong. So when we look at things like obsessive behavior, compulsive behavior, hyperactivity, tics, autoimmunity, over problems where we have digestive issues or leaky gut, most of that is coming because there are networks on the other side of the brain that are actually too strong, and they're not being regulated appropriately. So both things can present with symptoms, and the mixture and the makeup of that. So we measure that objectively with all different types of standardized tests. And then we put together a curriculum that's going to address the underdeveloped networks, the weakened areas of the brain, and get them to their age level or get them to where they should be to match their other skills.
Mm-hmm. Do you see a difference in whether they come in as a child to you or whether they come in like later in life? Is there a delay in how long it'll take?
Yeah. As I said, we work with kids that are up to, traditionally 18, but we've had some kids that are, in their 20 or early 20s that have worked in our centers, and we get great results with all of them. And as I said, I know that, myself, I work with adults. I teach a course that mostly is made up of people, MDs, DCs, PhDs that work with adults, because that's the important thing to understand about development and neurodevelopmental issues. What I estimate is in any practice, medical practice, chiropractic practice, PT practice, when people come in complaining of symptoms, especially if there's multiple symptoms, at least 40% of those issues probably go back to childhood, meaning they are the end result of a neurodevelopmental issue. And so therefore, they can present with all different types of things, but they are developmental neurological problems. And unless you know how to go back to the beginning of their brain development, and unless you go back to it, you're not going to get the same results that you should get. So what we find is that when you look at the principles of neuroplasticity, neuroplasticity is based on many things. Obviously, age. The younger a child is, the younger an individual is, the healthier their body is, the more metabolically active, the more you can change the brain quicker. But it's also a product of engagement and motivation. So what we find is that we get, some of the kids that are most motivated are maybe boys or girls that are 14, 15, 16, 17 with Asperger's that don't really have a social life because their right-brained, social nonverbal communication skill is so underdeveloped, and they don't know how to do it. And, doing social skills classes doesn't really work. So, they come in and they're desperate for friends, or they're desperate to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and they're starting to realize it, but they just don't know how to do it because those areas of their brain never developed. And they are extremely motivated. And when we show them and when we give them the tools and we have them do specific activities, their motivation level, they try so hard at it that we get such dramatic changes in a short period of time and often resolve them completely. So, it's a product of not only age, it's a product of health, it's a product of, the environment around them, the type of family they have. And all of those things are, really, really important and determined. So, really at any age, someone can make dramatic changes in their brain. It's really a matter of how much effort they put in. The problem with working with adults or with older kids or young adults is that you get to a certain point where they've developed all these secondary behavioral characteristics to compensate for their primary deficit. And, they may be very angry. They may have become very oppositional, and, they've become kind of defiant just because, they may have been bullied. They may have been treated a certain way. People around them have low expectations, so they give them low expectations. They get certain limiting beliefs, and they just don't believe that anything ever can make a difference. And because of that, they won't make the effort. And, when they get to adulthood, you can't make them do things, right? When they're kids, we can, the parents can make them do things, and that's, the advantage of it. But once you get to be older, it's hard. So that's where the challenge comes in when working with adults. It's really for them to believe that they can actually get better.
Yeah. So at your center, are you working on all of those dynamics? Are you like educating them on like not only the environment stuff that's happening, but like counseling on nutrition and things like that as well?
Yes. Now the brain balance centers, you have to understand that they are learning centers. There was a very particular reason why I created them as learning centers and put them in the education world rather than the healthcare world. There was a couple of reasons. One is I believe our education system is completely broken. The way we educate kids is really ridiculous, and we don't consider neurology or the brain in education, which is really kind of amazing, right? So that was one of the number one reasons why I wanted to put it in the education world, and we're making a huge impact in that world now. We're in various school systems. I mean, we're doing things that are huge, and I think we're going to make a revolution there. The other is that I did not want to compete with a lot of my healthcare colleagues, and other chiropractors or people that are out there doing functional medicine at a very high level. So we don't do anything that's considered treatment. We do exercises, activities, academic activities, and we do work and educate them about nutrition and diet and food sensitivities. And we have an online website where we have people, maybe 5,000 families around the country that are a part of it, and they share recipes and they share information, and we give them a very sophisticated book about that. But we're not doing anything really that would be, I mean, if they need to have more sophisticated testing done or interventions, or they need vitamins, or we encourage them to go see a health professional, and so we're able to really do the things that people won't do in practice. Now, I teach a course that is more of a clinical model, where it's more of a one-on-one, and it's more, that's a healthcare model. But in Brain Balance, we are really in the education realm. So, but what we do is we do work with them on teaching them how to have a healthier lifestyle. We do teach them or get involved with some of their, the home dynamic in the family, modifying their lifestyle. That was the point of Reconnected Kids. Disconnected Kids was really about telling people, what is ADHD? What is autism? What is actually happening in the brain? And how do you measure that? And how do you put together a program for your child to change that? And, Disconnected Kids has been translated into, I think, 8 languages at this point. And it's one of the best-selling books in this field since 2009. And I get letters from people all around the world, literally every week, who are just using the book alone and are completely, eliminating many of these issues that their kids have. And when I travel, as I lecture around the world, many of them come to meet me, and I get to meet their kids, and it's really incredible. So I know just from using the book alone, it's a great tool. I know many doctors and therapists and teachers are just using that book. They just recommend it. But Reconnected Kids was about, expecting that when the brain is changing, you actually trigger, these development and growth, and they're going to have different milestones that are going to come on that may look negative. Their behavior is going to change. People come to us and they, what they want is change. And usually when they go to anybody else, they don't get that change. They're frustrated. They come in and they say, I spent all this money and nothing happened. When they come into our centers, that change is usually dramatic. It usually happens very rapidly, but it can be confusing because the child can, a child who never cried before starts to cry. A child who never said no starts to say no. I've had families that come in and tell me, if they understand this, when we educate them, they say, oh, they never cursed before, and now we're really happy about that, or we're so happy they lied to us for the first time, like a typical teenager would, right? And if somebody on the outside is hearing this, they'd be like, what? You're happy that you're making kids lie and, cheat and, do all the crazy things that teenagers do. But, that's a big step, actually, because it's part of the development of the brain and part of the development of behavior. We have negative and positive behaviors and negative and positive emotions on both sides of the brain. And and they're supposed to be there. But what we need to have is balance, flexibility. And these kids don't have that. And when these skills start to emerge, many of them, especially with right brain skills, fear, disgust, sadness, depression. These are things that can come out. And so it's about educating people about that and letting them know that this is going to happen. And that was what Reconnected Kids was all about. So we encourage people to read the book and then to also look at their home and create a positive environment at home. That's very important. As a matter of fact, right now, my wife and I are just completing a web series that a lot of major networks are very interested in, and it will be coming out very shortly. So anybody that's out there, it will be released soon. It's actually called Disconnected Kids, Reconnecting Families. And what my wife and I have done for a number of years is we know that, when the kids go through the brain balance program, or if they're working with another person who's been trained by me, and they're doing these types of activities, that they're going to get better neurologically. We know they're going to have changes, but sometimes some families need a lot more help in their home. There's been so much dysfunction that has developed over the years. And so my wife and I go into their home and literally work with these families. And it's pretty fascinating what we do. We work with, everything. I mean, cleaning their environment, working on their diet, trying to save their marriage. I mean, 80 to 85% of families with kids with learning challenges or behavioral issues end in divorce. And obviously that's not good for the child who's already struggling. So it's, all of that is very, very important to look at. And all of that, I consider all of that is part of what I teach in my courses as to how to do that. And I've also created those resources, through the books that I've written.
Yeah. Wow. Your work is truly amazing. As far as when you are analyzing the kids at the very beginning, you said that you use tests and stuff. Do you use primitive reflexes at all?
Yeah, primitive reflexes are one of the most underutilized, undertaught, and single most important things that anybody can incorporate into their practice. And they're really easy. I mean, I remember I had somebody time me while I was going through an exam just to see how long it took. And it took me 4 minutes to do a really complete primitive reflex examination on somebody. So there's no excuse for someone not doing it. It's just a matter of getting competent at it. And there are other people out there teaching primitive reflexes, and they make it very, very complex. And I think they teach too many of them. But the bottom line is that this is one of the greatest tools that someone has, because when an adult walks into your practice and they're complaining of various symptoms, that could be anything. It could be high blood pressure. It could be, diabetes. It could be depression. It could be anything. And what you don't know is this something that just happened? They may say, hey, I just developed these symptoms a month ago or a year ago or 2 years ago. And that may be the case. They may be something that was acquired later on in life, or they may be the end result of a problem that's been around their whole life. Or it may be a combination of both things going on. And so the best way to know that is to do a primitive reflex exam on every patient when you initially see them. If you see primitive reflexes are present in adults, and I have many, many videos that I have of adults, doctors, chiropractors, MDs with primitive reflexes so strong that they are textbook for a child. And most of these primitive reflexes should be gone by 6 months. The Babinski goes away at 1 year. That's the last one. And so, when someone is 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 and they still have these incredibly strong primitive reflexes, that's a big deal, right? And then when you ask them about their development, there's always a developmental history that's significant, meaning they always go back and say, yeah, I used to struggle as a kid, or, I had emotional problems, or I had learning disabilities, or I had ADHD. Or, I always struggled with relationships, or I had a lot of immune dietary issues when I was a kid or my whole life. And now they're coming to you, and really that problem that you're seeing is probably a result of that developmental delay. And one of the first steps and one of the first things you need to do is get rid of those primitive reflexes. And the way you do that is very simple, through very simple types of exercises. But what I've been able to find is that the most efficient way to get rid of those primitive reflexes is by doing some sort of hemispheric intervention along with those types of exercises. And then you can get rid of those primitive reflexes very, very quickly. I often do demonstrations where in front of a class, I can get rid of primitive reflexes in a matter of minutes just by doing some hemispheric stimulation. Of course, many of them will come back because there's a neuroplasticity. We have to do that, but I can also bring them back by doing hemispheric intervention to the wrong side, and I can also make them worse or make them better. So there's this dynamic balance in the brain that if it's out of balance or if it's delayed, and actually the delay in the brain, what the primitive reflexes signify is that there's been this kind of arrested development at some stage of development in the brainstem and in the early development of networks in the brain. And that arrested development has caused a delay of, or an immaturity of those networks that remains there for the rest of their life. And that has created a developmental imbalance that is there and is never going to go away unless you really know how to identify it and to take care of it. So primitive reflexes are not just important just for children, they're important for everybody. But what I'm actually presenting in Oxford this summer. There's a major conference called Movement and Cognition. And our lab actually is one of the co-sponsors along with Harvard, MIT, the Sorbonne, and Oxford, as well as a couple of schools from Israel. And I am presenting data, original experimental data that we have collected from our centers on the correlation between primitive reflexes, the number, the severity, and the correlation between academic achievement scores and behavioral scores. And then what we're showing is that as people eliminate their primitive reflexes, to the degree that those primitive reflexes get improved, we see a correlation with the improvement in academic achievement and behavior. So there's a direct relationship there that is very powerful. And, it's a very simple thing to do. It takes, like anything else, skill to really get good at eliciting, because some of these reflexes can be so subtle if you don't do them properly. But it is an incredibly important tool for everybody.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely believe that as chiropractors, we definitely need to be checking the primitive reflexes. I know there's tons of them and it could take a long time, but you said you have yours under 4 minutes. Is there a handful of ones that you think definitely should be doing?
Yeah, they're about
a small list.
Yeah, they're about 8 to 10. And part of this is, if you look at primitive reflexes have been known in child development for decades and recognized as part of normal child development. If you look in any pediatric neurology exam or textbook, you see that there are a list of primitive reflexes that are, the most well recognized and are very important, and that every pediatric neurologist and really pediatrician is usually has been or should be trained in looking for them. The only difference is they are taught that they automatically go away in childhood 100% of the time. And if they don't go away, the only thing that would cause that would be really a brain injury. So, they don't look at them beyond infancy. But what I will tell you is that the ones that are the most common are really the ones, in the way I do my exam is I start with the tonic labyrinthine reflex, and then I go to the Moreau, and then I do the asymmetric tonic neck reflex. I do those in a standing position. And then I have someone go on all fours, and we look at the spinal galant, we look at the spinal parese. We then look at the asymmetric again on all fours. We have them do the symmetric tonic neck reflex, and then we have them lay on the back, and we go and we do the Babinski, we do the palmar grasp, we do the rooting, and then we do the Moreau again in a technique that I've developed And you can also do the asymmetric again. Sometimes it's important to look at certain reflexes in different positions because they may or may not show up. So, those are the reflexes that we look at. There are some other reflexes that you can look at as well. There's the Babkin, there's the palmar mental. Some of these ones around the mouth and face are very important because, looking at asymmetry and looking at development of muscle tone is one of the best windows into development of the nucleus ambiguus, which is really what we call the ventral vagal system, which is really the parasympathetic system in the most mature form. And it also is very important for what we call the social engagement system. So many of those primitive reflexes in the mouth and the face, if they don't go away, they are showing that there's an immaturity in development of the brainstem areas, and especially in those autonomic regulation areas that may obviously have wide impact on digestion and on immune regulation and hormone regulation, all of those things.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah, I definitely want to make sure that students learn those while they're in school and get out and practice with those. Is there any other advice you would want to give to students?
Yeah, there's a lot of advice. When, as an old guy, right? I'm kind of an old guy. I've been doing this neurology stuff for a long time. I've been a chiropractor for a long time. And at this point in my life, my kids are like your ages, right? So what I really am interested in is not just educating people, but inspiring them. I find that, I've had so many thousands of people that have taken my courses, and I get people that come up to me all the time. And, what they want is not only to be educated on neurology and developmental neurology and those things, but what they're also looking for is some life lessons, meaning, how do you do what you do? How do you, Brain Balance will do probably, $80 million this year. We have 140 centers across the country. We'll work with almost 10,000 children. I have 5 best-selling books that came out in the last 7 years, published 50 scientific papers, 20 chapters in books. I have a very successful marriage. Obviously, I lecture all over the world. I have a practice. We have a TV show. We have radio shows. And people want to know, how do you do that? And, it's the type of thing that I incorporate a lot of that into my teaching, because I don't want to go out there and just give people knowledge that they're not going to use. And I find that people need more inspiration than ever now. And so, there's a lot of things out there that are important, but one of the most important things is to really develop the skills and the habits. There are some basic habits that make people successful. And one of the most basic skills is just not to give up, to set a goal and to stick with it. And it's very, very simple, but most people, life is kind of easy now and they can't stick with things. So that's one piece of advice that I would give. I have a Facebook page where I put up an inspirational message and video every day. It's called Better Than Good, the Science of Success and Happiness. And it really looks at the science, the neuroscience of the brain that really dictates a lot of personal development. But it also looks at all these different skills. I'm putting out skills all the time that people can use and that I've learned from other really successful people that I'm fortunate enough to interact with. So people may want to check that out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It is to interview you and learn more, and I'm so excited to dive into this.
I'm looking forward to being there, and I'm looking forward to meeting you in person and talking more about this and answering some questions. So thank you for having me, and look to see you again soon.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay.